The other day, Biden's press secretary got up and described what they were going to be doing as a result of the Capitol Hill incident, in which a police officer died by getting a fire extinguisher thrown at him, a lady was shot, and a couple of other people had strokes and heart attacks. And this is being compared to 9/11, and it's being used to go after the new terrorists, the domestic terrorists.
I also have some news to share on the president's response to domestic violent extremism. The January 6th assault on the Capitol and the tragic deaths and destruction that occurred underscored what we have long known. The rise of domestic violent extremism is a serious and growing national security threat. The Biden administration will confront this threat with the necessary resources and resolve. We are committed to developing policies and strategies based on facts, on objective and rigorous analysis, and on our respect for constitutionally protected free speech and political activities. Our initial work on DVE will broadly fall into...
And you'll notice right there, she dropped a new, what are they, anagrams? The what'd she say? DVE, domestic violence extremists, DVEs. So I guess that's going to be a new meme going into the social strata. So get used to that one.
3 areas. The first is a tasking from President Biden sent to the ODNI today, requesting a comprehensive threat assessment coordinated with the FBI and DHS on domestic violent extremism. This assessment will draw on the analysis from across the government and, as appropriate, non-governmental organizations. The key point here is that we want fact-based analysis upon which we can shape policy. So this is really the first step in the process, and we will rely on our appropriate law enforcement and intelligence officials to provide that analysis. The second will be the building of an NSC capability to focus on countering domestic violent extremism. As a part of this, the NSC will undertake a policy review effort to determine how the government can share information better about this threat, support efforts to prevent radicalization, disrupt violent extremist networks, and more. There's important work already underway across the interagency in countering DVE, and we need to understand better its current extent and where there may be gaps to address so we can determine the best path forward. The third will be coordinating relevant parts of the federal government to enhance and accelerate efforts to address DVE. This considered, NSC convened process will focus on addressing evolving threats, radicalization, the role of social media, opportunities to improve information sharing, operational responses, and more.
So they're going to be working with non-governmental agencies. I wonder what NGOs that is. So you have the Biden administration now is mobilizing tens of millions of dollars worth of governmental agency task force in response to the Capitol Hill incident. Now, when the Patriot Act went through because of 9/11, you had to at least give the public at the time the fact that thousands of Americans' lives had just been lost, that 9/11 on the television was basically trauma-based and mind control. But what they're mobilizing all this off of and introducing pre-written bills and doing all of the things that they did around 9/11 with the Patriot Act, etc. They're doing it off of the Capitol Hill incident. And I just don't understand. I don't know if it's really selling that well, if people are severely that angry about the Capitol Hill incident. I don't understand how you could have seen a summer of rioting and burning buildings down and dozens of people murdered during those protests and yet be so infuriated by the Capitol Hill incident that you're going to start calling people domestic terrorists and create tens of millions of dollars worth of interagency tasks that have to be done by the bureaucracy to tackle an issue off of the Capitol Hill incident. But that's what they're doing. Tucker Carlson had Glenn Greenwald, and they were talking about the same kind of thing, because it's closing in from all sides, guys.
Not a lot of actual policies talked about at the inauguration today, but the new president, Joe Biden, did declare a brand new war on domestic terrorism, which does seem like the headline. We've been waiting for this for a little while. The country's intelligence establishment seems to be salivating at the thought of treating fellow Americans like ISIS.
Looking forward, that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of the country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
Libertarians. Get ready, folks. Libertarians.
And unfortunately, I think there has been this momentum that has been generated as a result of, unfortunately, the demagogic rhetoric of people that's just departed government, but also those who continue in the halls of Congress.
Oh, an unholy alliance, if you will. Because I am stupid, I speak exclusively in cliches, but I was still able somehow to run the CIA, which ought to tell you something, a lot, really, about the rottenness of our system. But the headline here is insurgents. What you're hearing is that people who disagree with me or may criticize me are in fact insurgents. And of course, politicians love the idea of this. Brad Schneider, for example, is a congressman from Illinois. He's introduced something called the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act to make it a lot easier to spy on the Americans who are paying for the spy agencies. Watch.
Would you like to see more monitoring of radical domestic movements?
Well, the short answer is yes. That's the purpose of this bill.
Yeah. Short answer is yes, purpose of this bill. Glenn Greenwald is the most independent of independent journalists. He writes on Substack, where we hope you support him. He joins us tonight. Glenn, this is starting to make me a little bit nervous. Do the rest of us have cause to be concerned about this trend?
Absolutely. A lot of times if you warn of a danger, you have to piece things together in order to demonstrate that it's actually coming. In this case, you don't have to. They're explicitly saying precisely what they want to do. The thing that struck me so much about that John Brennan video is it would be one thing if they were saying, look, there's a band of people, 20 here, 50 over here, who wear swastika armbands, who still are in the KKK. There's maybe 2,000. We need to. That's not what they're saying. What he's saying is the exact opposite. Every group he lifted, even libertarians. It's essentially he's defining the insurgency as anyone who has an ideology other than neoliberalism. In other words, other than the ruling class view that is about to congeal and merge with the power of the state. And what they're talking about explicitly, Tucker, is using the tools that they used to take ISIS off the internet, the tools that they used to destroy Al-Qaeda. They're talking about it as a second war on terror. And that first.
And understand what Glenn Greenwald is saying there. There were specific counterterrorism tools that were used against ISIS and other terrorist networks. They are attempting to bring the power of the intelligence apparatus down on libertarians.
War on terror, no matter what your views were originally at the beginning of 9/11, ended up eroding not civil liberties just elsewhere, but here at home as well. One that is born by name of being a domestic war on terror designed to essentially criminalize any oppositional ideology to the ruling class. There is literally nothing that could be more dangerous, and it's not fear-mongering or alarmism to say it. There are bills pending by Adam Schiff as well that would simply take the existing war on terror legislation always aimed at foreign governments and foreign actors and simply amend it to say we can now do that within the United States.
Who's going to stand up in opposition to this? I don't see any of the corporate Republican caucus really even noticing. I see a lot of people I thought were liberal turn out to be not liberal at all, but more authoritarian. So how do we prevent this from happening? Any idea?
Well, one of the things I'm really hoping for is that we can finally get out of enough people believing that the way to understand Washington is Democrat versus Republican, and that you side with one team and believe they're on your side and defending your interest and the other team is your enemy. It is not true. There is a ruling class elite that is extremely comfortable with the establishment wings of both parties. They love Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer every bit as much as they love Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney and Marco Rubio and Paul Ryan. Those are the people who they fund equally because those are the people who serve their agenda. agenda. Then there's a whole other huge group of people at whose expense they rule. And some of them consider themselves on the left and some consider themselves on the right. And it's time to break down those barriers. I was super enthused to see a group of 8 left-wing politicians, including Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and others, say, we will not allow a new war on terror because we know how dangerous it can be. Let them stand with right-wing members to break down this artificial, false, fraudulent prism that the way to understand Washington is thinking that one of the two parties is on your side. Neither of them is.
And Glenn Greenwald just said it right there, which is probably the most important thing to come out of all of this. And he's exactly right. There are disaffected members of both parties, progressives on the left wing, MAGA conservatives on the right wing, both of whom represent large numbers. The numbers behind Bernie Sanders and the numbers behind Donald Trump. Those two, I had this thought today, and I was thinking to myself, the third party candidate, it never works. Because one party or the other is worried that that third party candidate is going to take votes away from them. And what I was thinking was that what really we need is a third and a fourth party. Because if there's a fourth party, then you have, like you say you have the progressive Democrats, the neoliberals, the neocons, and the MAGA conservatives. In that case, one party isn't over worried about ceding its votes to the other party because they're going to lose because there's not another party that's also draining votes from them. If that makes sense. Immediately at the establishment of these 4 parties, they would each have relatively equal power. You're still going to have establishment folks, baby boomers and the like, that are going to want to side with either the regular old Democrats or the regular old Republicans. But we've seen the numbers behind Trump and Bernie Sanders that there's enough for a third party on each side of the aisle. And I really think that that's what has to happen. Not a third party, but a third and a fourth party. Mutually assured destruction. It will open up people who would normally be like, oh God, if I vote for this person, then it'll be a Democrat who gets in. Or if I vote for this person, it'll be a Republican who gets in. It will alleviate that fear because you'll essentially be looking at a populist and a governmental representative on each side. And I think in order to get that kind of thing done, the first thing that has to happen is that the disaffected members on both sides of the aisle, on each side of the party, need to come together and stop talking about all the things that separate us and start talking about the one thing that brings us all together. And that is that the Washington establishment on either side of the aisle is not working for any of us. And we want a restructuring of the political system, right? We can do that. We just have to start working together to do it. I'm telling you, third and fourth party.
I feel like a lot of people are going to be saving that permanently, what you just said, on their DVRs. And I certainly hope they do, because you're right. Glenn Greenwald, thank you very much.
And so that's Glenn Greenwald talking about it. But if you're watching conservative talk shows, you're also seeing that inside of the conservative sphere, that type of worry, that type of unease about not just censorship, but lists and counterintelligence operations and those kinds of things that are making people uneasy, it's starting to sift down into the conservative talk show space as well. Listen to
Seb, I'm guessing you're worried too, although you don't strike me as a particularly nervous type of guy, but you're worried about the hammer dropping on all of us in terms of our ability to communicate.
Look, it's going to happen sooner or later, but I don't lose sleep over it. You know, it's easy for me when you got a dad who, you know, had the scars on his body till his dying day of the torture that the secret police did to him in a dictatorial regime before he escaped from a political prison. I just bring it, you bastards. Just bring it. Because sooner or later, those types of regimes, and I mean regimes, fail. And when you've got 74 million people who voted for a man who believes in America, who loves America, and who believes in freedom of speech, who didn't spy on American journalists like Obama didn't put journalists and their sources in prison, then sooner or later there will be a backlash. And this isn't a threat, it's a fact. I taught for 6 years irregular warfare and counterinsurgency for the Defense Department. And when you silence people with true grievances, sooner or later, something will occur.
And I want you guys to remember what Sebastian Gorka just said just then, because it's exactly what they're going to be discussing on an episode of Jimmy Dore that we're going to go over. You cannot keep silencing people with legitimate grievances. You can't keep doing it. And the worse you do it, the worse it's going to get.
And the idea that we're going to run and hide from it is utterly un-American. And you're right, there is a coordination here. Remember, Michelle Obama writes a 2-page letter that Donald Trump should be deplatformed.
Yeah.
And 72 hours later, he is deleted. He's unpersoned by Jack Dorsey. And then we see the video from the Twitter meeting, thanks to Veritas Project, Jack saying, if this isn't just about one account, this is about lots of accounts, and it's going to last a long time. You've experienced it. I've lost 100,000 followers in 10 days.
Yep.
But do I give up? Do we give up? No, we persevere, because sooner or later, more and more Americans, even in the middle, most Americans are apolitical, will see the fascistic tendencies of the Democrat Party and will understand what you understood when you left the Democrats, that this is not your daddy's Democrat Party. This is not your granddaddy's Democrat Party. And it is now a bunch of radicals who are a hostage to their own radical extremism.
Well, that's a perfect segue to Jack here, because you wrote the book, Democrat to Deplorable. What do you make of the people that we used to hang out with all the time? Because they're not all bad. I know they're not all bad. We all know that they're not all bad. But I have been, if there's one group that I'm just supremely disappointed with right now, it's my old crew. It's the last few remaining decent liberals who I saw celebrating. I mean, many of them who've been on this show celebrating the censorship of Donald Trump. What do you make of that crew at this point?
It's tough, man. In the 90s, I was counterculture in Washington, D.C. I liked to do underground parties, and I was anti-establishment. And as I grew up, I think I retained that. And what I see from my old friends that are all still Democrats, they think they're anti-establishment, but they are the establishment now, and they're just not aware.
And that is so clutch to get people to understand that the party that you're supporting is now doing all the things that were done in a post 9/11 world, but they're doing the next step, and it's a lot worse.
Of the fact, and they've lost all of their rebel or punk attitude that they had, and they're just towing the line. And truly, deep down inside, I believe that they're just not informed, and that if I could, I know it's fruitless and I know it's hopeless, but I swear if I could just get into their head just a little bit and help them see what I see, I just feel like I'm ahead of the game. And I do believe that we did see an expansion in the Democrat to deplorable vote. There were 9 million in 2016. I believe that group got bigger in this last election. There are people that we've seen just online on Twitter, folks that were anti-Trump in the first go-round, that were convinced, united mostly behind being anti-woke and anti-critical race theory, etc. But I think what might happen, and Seb, you use the word fascistic. I'm ready to say declare it is a techno-corporate fascism that we live under.
This is a second point I would like you guys to remember for the next episode. A technocratic corporate fascism is what we live under. And he's exactly right. And like I said, we're going to go through a Jimmy Dore episode that was just so important the other day that I just have to bring it onto my channel and talk through it with you guys. But this is the second point I want you guys to remember. Now remember, we're on conservative radio here, okay? This is a couple of guys who switched from the Democrat to the Republican Party and Sebastian Gorka, but to many people in the world, we're on conservative, hard-line conservative radio right here, hearing these ideas. Now, that's what I want you to keep in mind for when we go over the Jimmy Dore stuff. Because this idea that I have about a third and a fourth party, I don't think it's impossible that the progressives and that the MAGA conservatives work together. I don't think it's impossible. I really don't, because at their core, they're both populist movements. And there is a way around all of this, where we're going, which is the neocon, neoliberal, fascistic, technocratic, military-industrial bureaucratic state ruling over us forever. That's like that's option 2. Option 1 is like we need to get together with progressives and other disaffected people from the government and form a legitimate opposition. Option 2 is we submit to the bureaucracy.
Party united with the corporations, acting in concert to silence people, to take away their human rights, their right to free speech, to unperson them, to exile them. When the government and the corporations are acting in tandem to take away your human rights, that is fascism. That is fascism.
Bingo.
And
Bingo.
we need to be talking about this more often, and not in the hysterical way that the people were calling us fascists before, but in a very serious clinical way. And I think, I'm hoping, maybe, and I still haven't extinguished the optimist in me, that center group, that people that went Democrat to deplorable, the walkaway folks, that is where we need to be focusing our energy, as chipping people off. And here's what's going to happen, I think. There are going to be more red pills delivered to the more normal American people throughout this year. And it's going to come in the form of critical race theory, and it's going to come when they're attacking your children. When they're telling your 8-year-old daughter that she needs to sit with her whiteness and suffer because of it and renounce her color and step aside and yield positions of power to people of color, that is when the red pilling of middle America is really going to take place. And I can see more of that coming in 2021 and beyond.
I totally hear you on that. And I actually, for those Dems that it's like you want to wake them up, I think a lot of them actually are also playing a bit of a duplicitous game, which is they know how dangerous this thing is. They know it's coming for all of them, but they just don't want to be put on the list, right? They don't want to be thought of as one of the guys in these 4 boxes that we got here.
The last guy I want to play is Dinesh D'Souza. He talked about basically power in politics, and it's a really powerful, quick talk, and I wanted to play it in line with this because what I'm seeing is a kind of a realization happening. The truther community, the individualistic type of people, starting to understand that having the right idea, being correct, is not enough.
My first book was called Illiberal Education, and in that book I talked about the paradox that colleges and the left talk about liberalism. They talk about free speech. Free speech was their mantra in the 60s and 70s, and yet, I said, now that they're in power, they're doing the opposite. They are suppressing liberal principles. They are suppressing freedom of speech. They have all these speech codes that restrict what can be said on campuses around the country. It's quite remarkable because, in a sense, I was seeing then in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, a preview of what was going to metastasize off the campus.
Because that's what the communist subversive plan was from the beginning.
Off the campus and move to American society. But in illiberal education, I was puzzled. I'm like, how can people who use the language of freedom so quickly convert to unfreedom? How can they switch it around like that? And of course, the answer was they switch it around because before they were not in power and after they were. So power actually explains the switch. They never really believed in free speech. It was a useful tactic for them rhetorically when they were on the outside. Oh, we need free speech, don't come after us. But the moment that they were in power, they were perfectly happy to go after their opponents. And some of the people who stormed the Capitol, like Ashley Babbitt, I think had in their mind the idea that this is 1776. This is sort of how we stage a takeover of the system of government, or at least we force the system to pay attention to us. We're in the right, and therefore they have to listen to us. We have a point, and we deserve to be heard. I think all of this misses, again, the brute language of power. Abraham Lincoln in 1848, in the aftermath of the Mexican War, said something very interesting. He said this: any people anywhere being inclined and having the power have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and form a new one that suits them better. So here's Lincoln sort of echoing the principle of the Declaration of Independence. Governments are built on the consent of the governed. If you don't have consent, hey, you have the right to rise up. You have the right. But then Lincoln adds this phrase, and having the power. It's not enough to have the right. You also have to be able to pull it off.
And he proved that out.
In other words, we all say very often that might doesn't make right, but Lincoln is saying that right by itself doesn't make might. To have a successful revolution, you need both. Now, what is the lesson for us in this? The lesson for us in this is that the left is really not about principles. I realize this is a little startling. It kind of overturns our civics book idea of America. My own idea of America was very much a civics book idea in the Reagan years. It's only when I had my case against the Obama administration, I saw what the Obama Justice Department was all about, that I realized that no, this is really not about justice. They're not asking, what did Dinesh do? How does this compare with what other people did? Should we give him the same penalty everybody else did? They didn't care about any of that. Their idea was, here is a guy who has been on the other side. Here is a guy that made our guy look bad. When Obama talked about, I'm my brother's keeper, here's a guy who went and interviewed Obama's own brother and made our great apostle Obama look like a fraud and a hypocrite. So how do we teach him a lesson? In other words, how do we make sure that not only Dinesh, but other people like Dinesh are deterred from taking on the great Saint Obama? It was all about power. That's what it was always about. And so it's widened my way of thinking about politics. Not that we don't pay attention to ideas and arguments, but we're not naive enough to think that that's all it's about. The reason they impeached Trump is they had the power to do it in the House, and so they did it. They think they can try to bully and muscle the Republicans to do it in the Senate. And if they do, it will once again be a power play by the left. They will use the media to try to create a drumbeat of support, intimidate the Republicans into submission, and pull it off. What this also means is that we need to think in terms of power, not just ideas. It's important for us to have not only right, but also might. I was kind of excited to see that incumbent Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Greene says on January 21st, I'm filing articles of impeachment against Biden. Wow. Now, the reason this is a bold move and not a naive or stupid move is because it only takes a handful of Democrats, 5 or 6, in order to make that impeachment go through. So if the Republican Party is unified, if it accepts and understands the language of power, it's time to recognize that we need to do to the Democrats what they have been doing to us. Let's recognize our power and use it.
So, do you think I was playing that because I agree with that? Do you think that I think that the way out of this is for us to do exactly to the liberals what the liberals did to Trump, and that we need to recognize that's the way we get power? Now, I'm afraid my friend Dinesh here is exactly right. He is exactly right about the liberal progressive party. He's exactly right about a lot of Republicans. But in this sense of the word, he's operating inside of this paradigm that it doesn't work. Impeaching Biden doesn't matter. Impeaching Trump didn't matter. The point is that neither one of them are working. And the thing that Dinesh is missing is that he thinks that only the Obama administration would have done that to him. The crazy thing about Dinesh's experience is that he had the bureaucratic state come after him and imprison him. And because Trump gave him a pardon, he has this point of worldview that the bureaucratic state, that was the left that did that to him. It wasn't. It was the bureaucratic state. It was the same people who were running the Justice Department under Bush and Clinton and Trump, for that matter. It's sad that he came to that conclusion. But he's right that having right idea isn't enough. We also have to shift the fulcrum of power, and because that's the language of Washington. And I'm telling you guys, third party and a fourth party. That's how you shift the fulcrum of power. Anyways, I got a lot more content coming, guys. I love y'all. Like, share, sub the channel. Talk to you soon. Peace.